Buddhism for Today, The Essential Wisdom of the Threefold Lotus Sutra by Nikkyo Niwano. Part 2, The Sutra of the Lotus Flower of the Wondrous Dharma. Chapter 5, The Parable of the Medicinal Herbs. In the previous chapter, Faith and Understanding, the four great Shravakas expressed their admiration for the compassion of the Buddha and the power of skillful means, by telling the parable of the rich father and the poor son. Furthermore, they conveyed to the Buddha their faith and understanding that, even though he expounds the Dharma according to the capacity of living beings to comprehend it and to the depth of their awakening, the basis as well as the goal of all the Buddha's teachings is always the one Buddha vehicle. Whereupon the Buddha replies, "Good, my good son, good. Kashyapa, you clearly articulated the truth of the Buddha. It is just as you have explained, but the merits of the Buddhas are far, far greater, so much so that they can never be fully described. Kashyapa, listen to me very closely. The Buddha is the king of the Dharma. This means he is the master of all teachings and wholly perceives the ultimate reality of all things. Hence, every single teaching he expounds leads to the way of truth. In consequence, he knows and discerns the attributes of all things through his wisdom, teaching this with methods tailored to the listener and the circumstances. His teachings lead all living beings to the knowledge of comprehensive wisdom. The Buddha can correctly and completely ascertain where all things lead, and also knows the inner workings deep within the hearts of all living beings. The eyes of the Buddha can perceive everything, and clearly see the true attributes of all things in our world. Moreover, the Buddha knows the two sides of all things. He sees the differences between all things, using the faculty of discernment, jnana. But at the same time, he also sees the equality or sameness of all things, with the faculty of insight, prajna. After prefacing himself in this fashion, the Buddha tells the parable of the medicinal herbs, the third of the Lotus Sutra's 7 parables. The parable of the medicinal herbs. Kashyapa, suppose that growing on all the mountains, along the rivers, and in the valleys, and on the ground throughout the world, are plants, trees, thickets, forests, and various types of medicinal herbs. Numerous varieties of plants, all different in name and form. In the skies above, a dense cloud spreads out, enveloping the entire world, and all across the earth there is a simultaneous cloudburst, pouring down rain in the same way everywhere. This rain drenches all the plants, trees, thickets, forests, and medicinal herbs. It moistens the roots, stems, branches, and leaves of the small plants, the roots, stems, branches, and leaves of the medium-sized plants, and also the roots, stems, branches, and leaves of the large plants. Every plant, whether small, medium, or large, is nourished by receiving a share of this rain according to its capacity, and is invigorated and empowered by it to sprout, grow, blossom, and bear fruit. If you pay close attention, however, you will notice that even though this universal cloud rains impartially, drenching everywhere in the world equally, on the receiving end, the amount of moisture plants and trees take differs according to their size and kind. Thus, the quantity as well as the quality of the water they draw differs. Even so, each plant and each tree inevitably matures according to its own nature and characteristics, each blossoming its own uniquely beautiful flowers and producing distinctly succulent fruit. You should also know that, although each is nurtured by the same soil and moistened by the same rain, the plants and trees possess this degree of wide-ranging diversity. Lessons of the parable. The roots, stems, branches, and leaves spoken of in this parable signify faith, precepts, meditation, and wisdom. Roots are the most vital part of plants and trees. Without roots, a plant cannot grow stems, branches, or leaves. Consequently, roots symbolizes faith. We cannot live according to the precepts unless we first have faith in the Dharma. Our faith initially motivates us to abide by the precepts. Keeping the precepts in turn creates the conditions that allows us to attain states of meditative concentration. Because of our concentration, moreover, we can obtain wisdom. Conversely, however strong their roots may be, plants will eventually die if their branches and leaves wither or if their stems are cut. In like manner, if we do not possess wisdom, our faith will also decay. In other words, the practice of religious life begins with faith and culminates in wisdom by way of precepts and meditative concentration. What we should take from this is that all of these 4 aspects of our religious practice are always tightly integrated and exist only interdependently. And so, if any one of them is lacking, our religious practice will be incomplete and we will be unable to grow. Just as there are differences in size, tall, medium, and short, among trees, there are obviously all kinds of diversity in the capacities of human beings. We must clearly understand that a large tree is not necessarily superior to a small tree, nor a small plant inferior to a larger one. The tall and straight cedar tree has its own unique biological role in the forest, and so does the boxwood shrub. The diminutive violet is beautiful, and the larger pampas grass possesses its own special elegance. In the same way, though there appear to be various differences in people's external appearances, intelligence, ability, character, and physical strength, all the qualities possessed by all living beings become beautiful and noble when they demonstrate their full potential according to their own natures and abilities. This is the meaning of equality taught by the Buddha. Receiving the Buddha Dharma is another matter, however. In the previous chapter, we learned that we must disregard any insecure fear that our capacity to understand might be limited, and we should simply devote ourselves to practicing the teachings of the Buddha. We must completely abandon all the petty calculations of our ordinary mindset and simply listen single-mindedly to the Buddha Dharma. This chapter's parable of the medicinal herbs teaches us that if we do so, our efforts will certainly be rewarded. All of us are like the parable's various kinds of plants and trees that are nurtured by the same soil and moistened by the same rain, each developing according to its own nature. By the same token, although the Buddha expounds only one teaching, the one Buddha vehicle, it is understood differently according to many individual factors, including living beings' nature, intellect, and environment. Even if we attain just a shallow understanding of the Dharma, or succeed in practicing the Buddha's teachings only partially, we have not wasted our time. Every effort is rewarded with the merits of the Dharma. We should not be content, however, with the level of merit obtainable by just partially understanding the teaching of the Buddha. The aspiration to deepen our understanding and aim even higher should always be present in our minds. And if we strive accordingly, our shallow faith and understanding will become the initial step in ascending to higher levels of faith and understanding. If we simply continue climbing one single step at a time, we will reach the highest state of mind without fail. You will comprehend this well after you read the latter part of this chapter. The important point here is that the teaching of the Buddha is one, the one Buddha vehicle, but living beings' faith and understanding differ according to their nature and capacity to understand the Dharma. Yet these differences do not mean that everyone's ability to understand the teachings of the Buddha is predetermined. One tree absorbs a copious amount of rainwater, while another absorbs only a little. One tree can reach maturity in a year, but another takes many years. One tree can bear fruit in just a year, but another tree requires 7 or 8 years. Suppose that the slower tree looked over at the faster tree and reproached itself, thinking, "There must be something wrong with me, because I cannot bear fruit in such a short time." This would be strange, wouldn't it? But it would also be strange for a tree to be complacently satisfied with its comparatively slow progress, telling itself something like this: "That tree over there bore fruit in a year, while I've just barely managed to grow branches and leaves after a year. But since we're both being moistened by the same rain, it's not a problem. This is just the best I can do." A tree that requires 7 or 8 years to produce fruit must practice and study diligently without rushing impatiently, becoming discouraged or feeling jealous of others, for surely the time will come when it will blossom and bear fruit. The fruit of a tree that has taken 8 years to bear is sweet, but fruit born in only a year is equally succulent, because what both achieve is the same, the awakening of the Buddha. We should be perfectly clear about this. The World-Honored One continues teaching to further clarify the allegorical elements of the parable, emphatically appealing to his disciples to understand the relationship between the Buddha's teaching and the awakening of living beings. The Buddha's main point in this passage is that in the parable of the medicinal herbs, the Buddha is just like the great cloud that pours its rain universally on all. In the same way that this great cloud covers and embraces the entire world, the Buddha uses teachings appropriate and acceptable to all in order to lead not only human beings, but in fact all living beings, to fully manifest their potential. The 10 epithets of the Buddha. At this point in the chapter, the Buddha turns towards all the living beings gathered in the assembly and expresses his identity using 10 titles. I am the Tathagata, worthy of offerings, universally wise, complete in clarity and conduct, well departed, fathomer of this world, peerless leader, expert trainer, teacher of heavenly beings and humans, Buddha, and world-honored one. These are known as the 10 epithets of the Buddha, or to be exact, the Tathagata, each of which describes one of the Buddha's virtues and powers. Tathagata means one who has come from truth itself. We can think of this as another term for Buddha. Worthy of offerings means that the Buddha is one who is deserving of offerings from human and heavenly beings. Universally wise describes the Buddha's correct and all-pervading wisdom. Complete in clarity and conduct refers to the Buddha's integration of complete knowledge and perfect practice. Well departed indicates that the Buddha has reached the other shore of enlightenment, so he is completely free from attachment to anything. Fathomer of this world attests that the Buddha understands the circumstances of all living beings. Peerless leader means that the Buddha is one who is unsurpassed. Expert trainer indicates that the Buddha is one who has compassionate mastery of the minds of living beings. Teacher of heavenly beings and humans tells us that the Buddha leads all beings in the human and heavenly realms. This can be understood more broadly to mean all living beings. Finally, Buddha, and world-honored one, articulates that he is the awakened one, who is the most revered in all the world. One who embodies these 10 virtues and powers is called Buddha. Through these consummate virtues and powers, the Buddha liberates those living beings who have yet to attain the mind that is immovable in the face of change, leading them to secure such a stable mind. He sets free living beings who do not know why delusions occur or how to remove them, by teaching them to understand how to do so. He comforts those who have not yet achieved true peace of mind, despite extinguishing their delusions, by putting them at ease. He leads to nirvana those who have not yet attained it, by enabling them to realize true awakening. The Buddha knows the world of the present, the world of the past, and the world to come as they really are. He is the one who understands all things with comprehensive wisdom, the one who sees all, discerning the ultimate reality of all things, the one who knows the way, perceiving the path of truth, the one who unfolds the way, making all living beings understand the way, and leading them to it, and the one who teaches the way, expounding it to all living beings. Knowing the way, unfolding the way, and teaching the way are all indispensable practices for followers of the Lotus Sutra. We know the way with our minds, practice the way with our bodies, and teach it through our speech. These 3 modes of producing action, karma, with the faculties of the body, physical action, speech, verbal action, and mind, mental action, compose the parameters of daily conduct for those who practice the Lotus Sutra by following the Buddha's example. In possession of such virtues and powers, the Buddha turned toward all living beings, urging them to gather to hear the Dharma. Then, when innumerable living beings gathered to do so, the Buddha perfectly grasped their natures and abilities, discerning whether their capacities to understand the teachings were keen or dull, and if they were able to stay the course, or were apt to neglect practice, or lose their way on meandering detours. The Buddha expounded the Dharma appropriately for each according to their capacities, causing all listeners to attain hearts of true joy and gain benefit. Moreover, the Buddha proclaimed that all living beings who have understood the Dharma well, have faith in it, and put it into practice, are, in the exact words of the sutra, comforted in the present lifetime, and afterward will be born in favorable circumstances, finding joy because of the way and being able to hear the Dharma again. Peace and comfort in the present lifetime and future lifetimes. To be comforted in the present lifetime means to lead a peaceful life in this world. In the past, people took this simply to mean they would recover quickly from illness and experience no trouble in the conduct of their lives. This was because people thought this merit would accrue even if one had no understanding of the Dharma. It was enough just to believe. More recently, however, people began perceiving comfort as only a spiritual issue, commonly understanding it as a mind unperturbed by any degree of suffering. Perhaps this change was a reaction to the notion that seeking material happiness was a corruption of religious people's motivations. Or maybe it was because people felt a certain social pressure to see the mind and body as distinct entities, which is a commonplace notion rooted in a shallow understanding of modern science. This is a misconception, however. Research in holistic medicine demonstrates that many physical disorders are alleviated when one's mental and emotional health improves. When one's mind is free and unencumbered, one's way of life naturally changes for the better. No wonder people can actually lead more comfortable lives when they understand the Dharma, have faith in it, and put it into practice. But following a faith merely for the sake of worldly benefit goes hand in hand with various vices, and one cannot attain true freedom for the mind with such an attitude toward spiritual practice. So, while considering spiritual practice an issue of the heart and mind is initially constructive, it is both a modern bias and a denial of the Buddha's power to assume that the connection between peace of mind and our comfort in the material world are unrelated to Buddhism. We should accept the Buddhist teaching with more humility. The second part of the passage above is highly significant. And afterward will be born in favorable circumstances, finding joy because of the way, and being able to hear the Dharma again. We have encountered the Lotus Sutra in our present lives because of our practice of the Dharma in previous lives. Even after our present lives are over, if we have attained a tranquil mind that is undisturbed by our environment, we will be reborn in favorable circumstances. We will be able to live peacefully in our lives to come because we will benefit once more from the happiness that comes from placing ourselves on the right track by practicing the Buddha Dharma again. During the development of East Asian Buddhism, the faith began to lean strongly toward a focus on achieving rebirth in a pure land, and in reaction to that objective, people today are now strongly inclined to limit the scope of spirituality to the matters of the human heart in the here and now. But the Buddhist teachings are not so limited. We must not forget that the teachings of Buddhism show us an ideal way to live our lives that include spiritual practices, both now and in future lives. The great cloud in this parable gives rain equitably to all, allowing grasses and trees to receive the amount of water appropriate to their kind and nature, each developing by manifesting their own uniqueness. In the same way, by truly listening to the Dharma, all people can gradually free themselves from the hindrances and disturbances of the mind. They can discover one of the teachings of the Buddha that is appropriate for them, according to their own capacity, and by means of it, enter the Buddha way. Attributes of emancipation, detachment, and extinguishment. Next, the Buddha tells the four Shravakas and the rest of those gathered in the assembly, here I quote directly from the sutra, the Dharma taught by the Tathagatas of a single flavor and a single attribute. Namely, it is the attribute of emancipation, the attribute of detachment, and the attribute of extinguishment, and it ultimately arrives at the attainment of all-embracing wisdom. This means that although the teachings of the Buddha are essentially undifferentiated, we can discern three attributes or modes of the Dharma: emancipation, detachment, and extinguishment. Emancipation is a state of mind no longer swayed by changes in circumstances or things. This is the perspective that can view all things impartially, seeing their sameness, and hence our minds remain undisturbed no matter what happens. If we become attached to the idea of seeing all things equally, however, we will end up arrogantly feeling as if we have transcended the phenomenal world of differences, distancing ourselves from the mundane and secular, and this will tend to make us indifferent to the suffering and distress of living beings. Consequently, we must free ourselves by detaching from this sort of complacency and strive instead to liberate living beings from their suffering. Such a frame of mind, characterized by the intention to liberate all living beings, is called detachment. The attribute of extinguishment is to extinguish the false discrimination between oneself and others, that is, to feel the unity of oneself and others, a sense of oneness that extends to all things in the universe. Ironically, we cannot feel the unity of ourselves and others as long as we still see suffering human beings as objects for our liberating activity, and we consciously and deliberately focus ourselves on the necessity of leading them to emancipation. Instead, when, without any forethought or ulterior motives, our hand naturally extends to others, and when we cannot but spontaneously embrace people in need, we will have attained the state of the unity of oneself and others. Perhaps the following unusual example can help clarify the attribute of extinguishment. When saliva is in our mouth, we do not consider it disgusting or repulsive in the least, because the saliva is part of our own body. On the other hand, once we spit it out, it seems irrevocably dirty and repulsive to us, because we have lost the feeling that it is a part of our own body. A person of true affection for humanity feels a strong sense of oneness with others, as if they and other people were one in the same body. There are historical examples of this compassionate ideal that demonstrate this sense of unity. For instance, you may have heard the story of the husband who sucked the phlegm out of the throat of his wife, who was too weak with tuberculosis to cough it up herself. Another is the record that Empress Komyo of Japan suck the sores on the back of someone suffering from leprosy. Obviously, we cannot reach this compassionate state of mind in a single step. But if, in the pursuit of daily life, we could just come to naturally feel another's suffering as our own the instant we see it, and then spontaneously experience the desire to help them, or if we could only feel another's joy as our own the instant we see it, how livable, bright, and peaceful the world would be. The Buddha Dharma leads living beings to progressively higher states of consciousness in the order of emancipation, detachment, and extinguishment, finally arriving at the attainment of all-embracing wisdom. This is the Buddha's holistic wisdom that integrates the true primary types of wisdom, the wisdom that perceives emptiness, seeing all things equally, and the wisdom that identifies the unique attributes of existence, recognizing the differences between things. In this fashion, the Buddha explains that living beings who hear, receive, and embrace, read, recite, and practice the sutra as taught by the Buddha will no doubt gain merit, but they themselves may not be aware of it, just like plants, trees, thickets, forests, and medicinal herbs do not know their own capacities. Only the Buddha knows. This is another point that we should appreciate. The Buddha positively affirms that those who practice the Dharma receive benefits in the here and now. We ourselves may not recognize these benefits, only the Buddha is aware of them. When we have faith in the teachings and put them into practice, something changes in us. For us who inhabit this Saha world, such changes are not necessarily something we will be satisfied with, but, from a broader perspective, they indicate that one is headed in the right direction. If we willingly accept these changes, though they may be dissatisfying in the beginning, they are sure to lead to happiness in due time. Coming to terms with things as they are. True liberation is the willingness to come to terms with things as they are, including ourselves. Imagine a porcupine that wants to rid itself of its quills and pulls them all out. It is eaten by a bobcat or some other animal in no time at all. If we feel uncomfortable because we seem different from others, we should remember that, seen through the eye of a Buddha, all things in existence are of a single flavor and a single attribute. The Song Dynasty poet Su Shi expressed this truth when he described awakening as the crimson of the flower and the green of the willow. Though a flower and a willow show differences in color and form, one being red and the other green, one being short and the other tall, on a basic level, they are undifferentiated because their essence is the same. John is different from Mary, but both are human beings. To borrow the language of science, both the crimson petals of the flower and the green leaves of the willow are formed by the same kinds of particles on the atomic level, electrons, protons, and neutrons. Thus, both are of the same essence. This is also what the Buddha means when he says later in the prose section of this chapter of the sutra that this dharma of a single flavor and single attribute finally comes back to emptiness. In this case, emptiness means equality, sameness in essence, which is to say that in the Buddha's eyes, all phenomena are equal. While all things are equal in this way, they are phenomenally manifested as crimson flowers or green leaves, or as John, who is skilled with his hands, and Mary, who is sharp-minded. The subtle working of the universal life can be seen in the generation of uniqueness from equality. If we can fully manifest our potential just as we are, this will also vitalize the lives of others, and, in so doing, we can realize the unity of ourselves and others, and the underlying oneness within the diversity of all living things. At the end of this chapter, the World-Honored One discloses that all his teachings culminate in leading all living beings equally to attain the mind of a Buddha, but that he does not explain this all at once because he can discern the differences in the innermost desires and aspirations of living beings. He concludes his explanation by telling Kashyapa and the others that their ability to realize this truth is quite extraordinary. Then the World-Honored One, wishing to restate what he had just taught, repeats it in verse. In the final stanzas, he emboldens his Shravaka disciples with powerfully encouraging words, which I paraphrase here. Truthfully, my Shravaka disciples, none of you have attained true awakening, but your practice just as it is leads to the path of the Bodhisattva. If you gradually continue your practice in earnest, you will all become Buddhas.